Hey everyone, welcome to Life Group Refresh. If you're watching us on Zoom with your group or you're together with your group in person, we're glad you could join us for this 4-part video series where we're going to be walking through Acts 2:42 through 47 and just refreshing ourselves with a vision of the kind of community that Jesus creates. As many of you could attest to, community has been hard in this time. The words quarantine and community typically don't go well together at all. So we thought it might be helpful to just refresh ourselves with a vision of the kind of community that Jesus is creating even in difficult times. We're actually going to spend a lot of time in this passage over the next couple months because along with this video series, Pastor JR is going to start a sermon series on the exact text as well. So we're looking forward to just refreshing ourselves with a vision in this text of the kind of community that Jesus creates. You know, one thing you may have heard over and over again, and maybe you yourself have said this over the last couple months, is something like this: man, this just makes me realize how much I need community. And you know, comments like that aren't coming out of nowhere. That means something, that points to something. It shows us that we have been created for community. And not just any kind of community. We've been created to be a part of a community that dwells with God, that loves Him, and loves one another. Jesus tells us that the two greatest commandments are to love the Lord your God with all your heart and to love one another as yourself. This is what we were created for. This is what Adam and Eve were created for. This is what they were commissioned to do, to fill the earth with a community of people that dwelt with God, that loved Him with all their heart, and loved one another. But the reality is Adam and Eve established their own law, and we have all followed suit. They established their own law. Instead of love God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself, it's become love yourself above God, love yourself above neighbor. And as a result, we've seen nothing but isolation and brokenness since. Isolation from God and isolation and relational troubles with one another ever since. The good news is that Jesus brings renewal. We say here at Church of the Cross that we are renewed as a community. And what we mean by that is that Jesus doesn't just set out to renew individuals, but he sets out to renew individuals and by His Spirit place them within community where that community is renewed as one, where they become a community of people that dwell with God, that love Him, and that love one another. You know, in Acts 2:41, shortly after Jesus ascended, we see Peter, with a Spirit-empowered boldness, preach the gospel. And the passage tells us those who received His word were baptized, and there were added that day about 3,000 souls. Thousands of individuals experience the grace of Jesus. Their rebellion is melted away, and they place themselves under the rule and reign of Jesus. They declare that publicly through baptism. His Spirit indwells them, and they are placed within community. It is a reality that exists for them. He places them in community, and He empowers them to love one another with the same love and power that they were loved by Him. They are then being renewed as community. And this is the community that we were created to live in. This is the community that our hearts all long for. Nothing can replace this community. Sometimes we set out to create a knockoff version, but the reality is that the knockoff never really feels like the same thing, does it? You know, a while back, my wife Chris and I, we became friends with a girl, and we just spent time with her like we would any friend. We invited her to dinner. We just hung out with her and treated her as a friend. And the one thing we kept hearing over and over again that I couldn't quite understand why we were hearing it was that she couldn't believe the kind of love and friendship we were showing to her. And I couldn't understand that because she had a wonderful family. She had great friends. And so why was she making this comment? And then it dawned on me, and I realized that when you have an experience with Jesus and His Spirit comes in you and empowers you to love as He loved, you are loving with a different kind of love than anyone or anything else could love. And so living in a community where the Spirit is empowering love of God and love one another, this is the community that our hearts were created for. This is the community that we actually long for, and nothing else can fake it. There's a craving in every heart for this kind of community. We actually get an amazing picture in Acts 2:42 through 47 of what it looks like to live in this kind of community, and it is compelling to see what Jesus does. In Acts 2:42 through 47, I'll read it for you. It says, "And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayers, and awe came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. And all who believed were together and had all things in common. And they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all as they had need. And day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved." In this text, we see a unified community. They had all things in common. They lived their life together. They centered their life around being the people of God. We see a worshiping community. They were devoted to teaching one another, to speaking truths to one another, to praying for one another. They were devoted to living lives of holiness as a community. We see a missional community. We say here at Church of the Cross that our life together is an evangelistic event. Well, that was happening in this text. Their life together was so unique, so compelling because the Spirit was empowering it, that it was an evangelistic event to those around them, and they welcomed others in day by day. So in the next 3 videos, you're actually going to hear a different staff member of Church of the Cross unpack these 3 aspects of community. You're gonna hear about a unified community in this text. You're gonna hear about a worshiping community in this text. And you're gonna hear about a missional community. You know, the reality is wherever Jesus goes, he creates this community by his Spirit. And it's been absolutely amazing, especially over these last 6 or 7 months, to see Jesus continuing to create this community in us and transcending our current cultural circumstances. I have been privileged to hear and see some amazing things happening within community. I've heard of gifts being dropped off to doors. I've heard of Zoom prayer meetings being organized for those who were sick. I've seen dozens and dozens of meal plans go out. There were cars parked outside our worship center on Easter Sunday morning, sitting in their cars, singing songs of praise to God as a group. I've seen visitors welcomed into new groups. I've seen individuals helping young moms with school for their children, online school for their children, and I could go on. But I hope that as you spend the next 3 weeks unpacking this text, you will be able to see how God is already at work in you, and that you will be grateful to see his Spirit working in you, even in these extraordinary times. So I just wanted you to be encouraged through that, and just hope that you'll be able to join us next week and the following 3 weeks as we continue to unpack this passage. Your leader will have some questions that you guys can discuss as a group. I'll read them for you, and you guys can discuss those. What has God taught you about community in this season? In this video, we discussed many different purposes for community. What purposes stood out the most to you and why? What are some things that might get in the way of living in the kind of community we see in Acts 2:42 through 47? Well, thank you for joining us. And like I said, I look forward to continuing looking through this passage with you. Hopefully you'll join us next week.